Job 15, verse 11, I'm going to introduce to you as one that gives me language for the governing thought of this chapel. You might remember after Job experienced a great deal of devastation, he's got a lot of words. They take up a good half of the book of Job. And he's got some friends who are trying to talk to him about his suffering. And in the middle of the book, in Job 15, one of his friends is pretty exasperated with Job. And he says, "Job, are the comforts of God too small for you? Are the comforts of God too small for you? Is that why you keep groaning and complaining and uttering your deep devastation?" Let's back up for a minute and think about that little phrase, too small. What first comes to mind for you when you think about too small? Clothes that don't fit. I have a t-shirt from 6th grade. I was a mathlete. Do you know what that means? That means I went to competitions with math problems as the center of them and tried to call that athleticism. Anyway, I have a hot pink t-shirt with an ocelot on it, and it says Melissa, O'Connor Elementary School mathlete. It's too small, or I'd probably wear it pretty regularly. What about food portions? I was at my grandparents' a couple months ago. They're 90, they eat like birds. I went for a run, and I came back to dinner, and the portion was about a quarter of my plate. It was too small for the appetite I had just worked up. What about laughs? You guys are gently, generously laughing. Have you ever tried to tell a joke and felt like the laugh was too small? Yeah. Or to serious things, apologies. Have you ever given or received an apology that felt far too small for the injury done? Or an answer, you ask a gigantic question, or someone asks a question of you that feels so big and you have to settle on too small an answer. There are also times where too small isn't even problematic. You wouldn't think to say, I'm too small to reach the top of this gym. No one expected me to be big enough to reach the top of the gym. But I suppose we could say I'm too small for it. Anyway, what we have in mind here is consolation. When Job's friend asks him, are the comforts of God too small for you? He's asking a question about, will your grief, will your pain, will your longing receive the answer that God has for it? And is it too small for you that you keep complaining? Maybe some of you have had griefs and received too small a consolation in the face of them. Maybe some of you have sat by others in grief or suffering and thought, I have too small a consolation. Or thought that you had a big enough consolation and experienced your friend or your neighbor as inconsolable. This is what's at stake in the question of too small. Are the comforts of God too small? It's not just that, though. The whole book of Job has been getting me thinking about too smallness. A great deal more than this question that Eliphaz asks rings of the problem of something being too small. It's been a hard-hitting semester for me in thinking about the book of Job. It's got me thinking about a lot of things that run the risk of being too small in me. Is my capacity to suffer too small? Is my empathy for the suffering of others too small? Is my patience in the face of no answer too small? Is my vigilance against the devil or my sensibility about the nature of temptation too small? And most of all, is my confidence in a God so very, very big that he can hold all the cries and complaints and confusions in this world until at long last they die away when we see his face in glory? Is that confidence, is that hope too small? I want to get you thinking with me about how the book of Job opens that up. So, let me reintroduce the story to you, those of you who don't have it totally on your mind. Job's chapters 1 and 2 has this weird prequel, and then the rest of the text almost is a long, long dialogue. So first scene, we're introduced to this man named Job. He's introduced as prosperous. He's got lots of donkeys and sheep and land and sons and daughters and servants. And he's called one of the greatest, or he's called the greatest person of all of the East. And he's also called righteous or blameless and upright. And he's praised for the fact that he fears God and turns away from evil. It doesn't seem, by the way, that we're meant to think of him as utterly righteous in the sense of sinless. He makes sacrifices, so it seems that he has accomplished a kind of upright standing with God by way of his proper worship and sacrifice and confession. Well, after we're introduced to him, we jump to a strange scene that most of you probably don't know what to do with. I hardly do, but I've been giving it some thought, so let me help you along. It's a strange scene where the sons of God, these are angels, they're presenting themselves to the Lord. We don't quite know why. Stranger still, Satan, whose name means the accuser or the adversary, he's set against somebody or something or everything, he comes among them. We don't quite know why that is. But God asks him a question. God says, "Where are you coming from?" And he says, "From going to and fro about the earth, walking up and down it." God seems to know what this implies because he asks a follow-up question, and it's, "Have you considered my servant Job?" We don't know totally what this to-ing and fro-ing is all about, but we know that God seems to think it involves some considering. And God wants to say, "Have you considered this man, Job? He's upright, he's blameless, he fears me, and he turns away from evil." But Satan's nonplussed with this example. He doesn't think Job's gonna stand up to scrutiny. His reply, does Job fear God for nothing? Take away all that good life he's enjoying, and by the way, the hedge of protection that you've set around him and everything he possesses, guess what? He'll curse you to your face, God. He's not in the sweet end of a good deal. You're giving him a ton of stuff for this fearing you, this righteousness. But if you push on it, it won't stand. If you push on him, he won't stand. Have you ever tested a relationship? I'll pretend like I haven't done this since then, but 5th grade, 1980s. My older sister and I were in love with brothers down the street, Jason and Jeremy Bernard. I was going out with Jason Bernard at the time. He was the right brother for me. He was my age. My older sister had the older brother until, by the way, I stole that older brother from her, but that's another story. Obviously, it worked out really well for me. Okay, back to Jason Bernard. We're in the garage in the 1980s listening to the Footloose soundtrack. And it occurs to me, if I break up with him, that will make him ask me out again. And that will feel so much better than the current situation in which we're going out. If he chooses me after I reject him, then I'll know he really loves me. I broke up with him, and he did not ask me out again. I tested that relationship, and it failed. I found out that there was not a bond between us that would survive rejection. Okay, really stupid example in the face of a really big situation. But what Satan thinks is put this to the test, put the fear of God expressed in this person of Job to the test, and he'll curse you to your face. God permits Satan to ruin Job, to take away all that he had protected. And Job is radically bereft, but he confesses, and it's a wonder to us. He confesses, "I had nothing when I came into this world, and I will have nothing when I leave it. The Lord gave, and the Lord took away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Satan's daunted, he's not daunted by this. It seems like most of us would say, okay, well, turns out that guy really loves God, but Satan says, no, you didn't go far enough. You didn't test him to the core, and so Satan gets to do this. He brings Job to, as yet, an even more unimaginable pain, to sickness and disease and distress that leaves Job on an ash heap, scraping sores from his body, totally bereft, with his wife echoing the taunt of Satan and saying, "Curse God to his face and die. It's time to quit. Quit this God." I want us to think for a moment about this wish that Satan has, that this upright creature would curse God to his face. This Satan, he says he toos and froze about the earth, but later in the New Testament, Peter says, your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking to devour somebody. That's the impulse that Satan is expressing here in this intro to the book of Job. So let's think for a moment about what I want to call Satan's fantasy. His fantasy is that he will somehow have a triumphant victory over the God of the cosmos, that he'll prove something fundamental about God and his creatures that is basically God is at fault and his creatures are failures. This is, of course, generally speculative, but I think that it's worth our speculation. Seems to me that Satan is first and foremost God's adversary. That might be worth holding in mind. He is God's adversary and he is God's accuser. He set himself against our Maker primarily and us secondarily. So this fantasy hinges on the fact that Satan wants to prove that God is faulty, that he is not utterly desirable, and that his creatures cannot possibly be satisfied with him, not only because they are deficient, but because God himself is not satisfactory in the end. So let's imagine that this is the case that Satan has against the God of all. He seems to want to rally some proof for his agenda. Have you guys ever polled other people when you want to prove your opinion, right? Do other people agree with you? That sometimes helps you to think, I must be right. It's not a cogent argument. Lots of people think lots of things. But we like to think we've got the majority on our side. What about in this direction? Do you ever want to rally other people's support for a view that you're better than someone else? When your ex starts dating someone else, don't you want other people to agree with you that you're better looking, more interesting, have more to offer in a relationship? Somehow you would feel vindicated or justified by their low opinion of someone else. Or if you need to have a villain in your story so that you can stand up to everyone's scrutiny, don't you need everyone else to agree that your roommate or your professor or your parent is actually a villain? We want to harness other people's opinions as proof that the narrative we're telling is true. Here's the thing. Satan pretty much knows that the story he's telling is a lie. He knows there's no way to dethrone God from his cosmic monarchy, but he's an accuser, and he wants to prove that God doesn't deserve his power and dominion. He wants God to be the villain. So he toos and froze about the cosmos, looking for evidence that God's not worth his creatures' worship, that he's played some mad trick on us all, and if only we could see things more clearly, we'd curse God to his face too. It's heavy. And I think you might feel like I do, sometimes implicated in that pull. But Satan's fantasy is too small. That's something I want you to be able to hear today. Satan's fantasy is just too small. It's too small, first of all, to account for God's utter goodness, for a God whom creatures could love without bribes, without allure, for a God who in himself and in himself alone is our true happiness, our only delight, and our soul's true good. I am speaking to you today with conviction and belief that the nearness of God is our one true good, that this is not just self-help, but it's just fundamentally true. Satan's fantasy fails to account for the fact that God is utterly good and desirable, and that our soul's only rest is rest in him. And so his fantasy is also too small to account for his own misery. It's too small to get him unmiserable. Listen, if you quit God, you wouldn't think you'd have to be walking around whenever his angels get together trying to make your case, right? If you quit God and walk away, you're finished. You've made your point. But Satan can't be finished with the God who is so much bigger than his fantasy of him. His solution to curse God isn't, it's too small, it's futile. He's perpetually busying himself trying to bring about the ruin that he wishes were the case in the universe. And this busyness just increases and increases his own misery. It's perpetual. God's unquittable. Dante in the Middle Ages tries to give us a picture of this sabotage that Satan runs in his desire to get out of his misery. He puts Satan at the center of a subterranean hell, which you would think is full of fire and such. But he says Satan has these wings, he's in the center, and he's flapping his wings because all he wants is to move, to get out, to aspire, to fight. But he flaps his wings perpetually, making ice. So he freezes himself in hell. He's in constant contradiction. Or Milton, 17th century English poet, who characterizes Satan a lot for us. Maybe you don't know how much you stand probably under Milton's account of Satan. I do. It's coming out in my chapel, just to acknowledge. Milton's Satan, he has a more internal torment that he can't get out of because he's stuck in self-pity and self-justification, and it turns out that these projects are too small to get us unmiserable. Milton's Satan, as he's trying to think about his rebellion against God, he says, "Be then his love accursed, may God's love be accursed, since love or hate, it deals to me eternal woe." I'm always miserable in his love. But then he says, no, cursed be thou, since against his thy will chose freely what it now so justly rules. So, I'm probably the cursed one because I'm the cause of my own misery. Which way shall I fly, infinite wrath and infinite despair? Which way I fly is hell, myself am hell. And in the lowest deep, a lower deep, still threatening to devour me, opens wide, to which the hell I suffer seems a heaven. If we get stuck in a story of self-justification and self-pity, we will never escape the misery of that small and smaller cosmos. And Milton tries to say it's abysmal, it gets deeper, but it doesn't get bigger. So, Satan's fantasy, too small to get him unmiserable, too small to account for the utter goodness of God, and it's too small to account for Job's capacity to suffer. And so notably, once Job becomes the center of the narrative's attention, Satan disappears. We don't hear of him again because Job utterly blows open the story with this growing and growing capacity to suffer without cursing God, without quitting him. I'll tell another quick sixth grade story. This one runs the risk of being, irrelevant. But I've been reading the book of Job long enough with students that I know that a lot of you feel like Job does curse God, that Job utterly transgresses, that the sorts of things he says, that they're terrible to say of the God of the cosmos. Well, fifth grade Melissa, got dumped or whatever. Sixth grade Melissa tried to be cool. So I had this friend named Melissa, so I went by Mel. And one of the things that the cool kids did was cuss. I don't know. I'm pretty sure that's how Biola works too. Anyway, I had a really rigid conscience, and I wanted to be good. So how do you be good and be cool all at once? I came up with a solution. I don't recommend it. It's just a 6th grade fantasy. Drop the last letter of cuss words, and it sounds like you're saying them, but you're not. So, 6th grade Melissa tried to tiptoe up to the closest to cussing without doing it. Why do I give you that example? Not actually to offer it as a paradigm for what Job's doing, but to say, believe me, or I invite you to think with me that that's nothing like what he's doing. He's not getting as close as you can to quitting God and then just staying back from it. No, instead, he is pressing and pressing and pressing further into a desire for the face of God and a desire for resolution. He doesn't quit God, and it takes a wild lot of him not to. And why? Because everything else that Job could do to satisfy his longing and to answer his suffering turns out to be too small. The only thing big enough is the face of God. So the long-suffering Job, who refuses to curse God, pleads and pleads to argue his case before God. He says, though he slay me, yet I will hope in him. I'll argue my ways to his face. The only answer is God himself. Silence with his friends for 7 days, which is, by the way, a gigantic good in the face of grief. It's too small. That wild solidarity, that deep compassion, the long silence is too small. Job starts to speak, and he has a big lament. And it's basically, if this is the end of my story, it would have been better if it had never begun. He says, I'm not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, but trouble comes. His great suffering, just like all human suffering, it's exponentially greater than just the events that he's enduring, because we human creatures, we don't just walk through our situations and tally our losses. We also have the mind or the spirit or the self that has to reflect on our experience. A poet, Gerard Manley Hopkins, he describes it this way: oh, the mind has mountains, cliffs of fall, frightful, sheer, no man fathomed. We human creatures, we don't just have experience after experience, we try to hold them, to collect them, we remember, and we try to make. Here are some of the difficulties I want you to hold in mind that Job faces in trying to make sense, even by way of lament, trying to make sense of his great, great suffering. First of all, his sorrow endures. Listen, it's easier to make sense once you've endured the worst of it, right? For Job, he's still in the middle. There is no end in sight for his suffering. The worst isn't over. If any of us have believed ourselves to be in the middle of torment, not on the tail end of it, we know that that is a place where every answer feels too small. There's no relief. Job says, what I dread befalls me. The arrows of the Almighty are in me. The terrors of God are arrayed against me. He suffers months of emptiness and nights of misery. So, in the depth of suffering, with no end in sight, sorrow endures, and it feels unanswerable. Secondly, and here's a place where Job is very different than us if we believe the promises of God that have been revealed to us. Job has no official hope. He talks about the future as the grave, as Sheol, as falling asleep, probably forever. He says, what is my strength that I should wait? And what is my end that I should be patient? What in the world am I waiting this pain out for? It's to be in the ground, to go into shadows. He says, in Sheol I will make my bed in darkness. I will descend into the dust. There's the ground of this conversation between Job and his friends, it does not admit the confident and clear revelation of the promise of the life of the world to come and the resurrection of the body. Though, by the way, Job has these moments of prophetic witness that shine like glimmers in the dark because mostly he can't seem to know that God has promises for the life of the world to come. Okay, third reason that Job's suffering feels unanswerable. His friends have answers that feel satisfying to them, but they don't satisfy him. How strange is that when someone's doctrine, and doctrine that you suspect has some soundness in it, right? When it satisfies other people, but it doesn't satisfy you. To Job's friends, God makes sense. They can speak for him. He's absolute, he's transcendent, he's stable, his patterns are certain and reliable. Bildad says, does God pervert justice? No, is the answer. Or does the Almighty pervert the right? No way. Zophar says, can you find out the deep things of God? Can you find out the limit of the Almighty? Job, you're overreaching. You're trying to understand things that are beyond you, but God understands them. Eliphaz says, blessed is the one whom God reproves. Despise not the discipline of the Lord. Oh, Job, endure this and good things will come of it. God is always doing good to you, and your reproof is important. Job says, what does your reproof reprove? This answer doesn't fit my situation. It doesn't satisfy him. Some of that pertains to the fact that they are accusing him of wrongdoing, right? So one of the reasons their doctrine doesn't fit well, it's too small, is because Job's saying, I'm upright. And we have the narrative of the book and God's voice to confirm that. That's a weird thing. But it also seems worth saying that doctrine at this point won't satisfy Job. Like Satan suspected, the suffering he has ushered in moves Job towards God's face only. Only God's nearness by the time we're in the middle of this story will satisfy Job. This is because no other explanation, no explanation at all will suffice. Job wants to have a case before God, an argument with him, but mainly he keeps insisting, I need to be in front of him. We need to be near each other. Then maybe things will come to right. I think Job won't be satisfied by any explanation. And until God meets him face to face, he has only two choices: to go on suffering or to curse him. So this ancient man of sorrows, he cultivates a patience that is marked by dissonance and vigilance. It means that he doesn't have satisfying explanations and he continues to endure. And that endurance is a fight. It is a speaking out. It is a waiting for the dawn, though the night seems long. To find my last page. His patience, unlike ours, has no particular end in sight. He knows that he's waiting for God's face, but he can't know if or when. This patience is really, really big. I hope that you feel like it's commended to you. The comforts of God are not too small for Job. He just hasn't seen them yet. So mostly I want you to sit with that. I want to stop there. If I could, Job is truly an exemplar to us. But I also need to flash forward a tiny bit to say his patience, it might be big enough for his suffering, but Job in the end proves too small for God himself. When God comes on the scene, he gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and he casts the vision wider, and he says to Job, where were you in the beginning? Where are you in the limits of the universe? God somehow, by saying all of these things, brings Job's torment to an end. He quiets him in some fundamental sense. He answers him, but not with answers to his questions. And so it might also be said that the comforts of God are not too small for Job, but Job is too small for them. And if that's true of Job, then it is certainly true of me. and probably of you. C.S. Lewis seems to have this scene in mind at the end of his novel, Till We Have Faces. Its main character has been making a complaint against the gods, and she finally revises in the final pages. And she says, I know now, Lord, why you utter no answer. You yourself are the answer. Before your face, questions die away. What other answer would suffice? We do not have on offer Job's experience of direct face contact with God, but we can look to the face of Jesus Christ, who utters bigger torment than we know, and we can find fellowship with him. May it be true for you. May God bless you today. You're dismissed.
Biola University prepares Christians to think biblically about everything, from science to business to education and the arts. Learn more at biola.edu.